back, everybody, to another episode of Unrestricted. Today, we're going to be breaking down a few more NBA teams, 6 in exact, with the Grizzlies, the Cavs, the Suns, the Kings, and the Oklahoma City Thunder, and then finally with the Spurs and Victor Wembanyama. And then we're going to be breaking down some predictions as far as most improved players in the NBA. Me and Kyle each give a few takes, and then we'll get into some more NFL content with each of our dark horse playoff candidates, if you will. First, we're going to talk about the new NBA Board of Governors approved gameplay changes for the 2023-2024 season. First one being a second coach's challenge being awarded if a first challenge is successful for a head coach in the NBA. Kyle, what do you think about that one?
Yeah, so initial thoughts, we both agree on this one. This is a great rule change. I think a lot of NBA fans have been seeing that ever since the first challenge was implemented, it didn't make a lot of sense to maybe not be punished, but not be outright rewarded for winning that challenge. So implementing a rule like this makes perfect sense. I think the danger with a rule like this that I have seen a lot of people talking about is slowing the game down. I think that adding one extra challenge doesn't do that. I don't think that's too big of a concern right now. I see that why there'd be some pushback on that. A lot of people kind of are worried that the pace of the game can be slowed down. You see a lot of times in college basketball, really long reviews for seeing if the ball was tipped off of someone's jersey or something like that. That's a big thing that people talk about. But just isolating this rule, putting it in a vacuum, I think it's objectively a great rule change.
Yeah, I think so too. I've just seen too many plays in the playoffs and in regular season, whatever it is, that have been missed and just couldn't be gone back on. I think there needs to be, even though the flow of the game does get disrupted, I think the coaches' challenges typically aren't the super long replays. It's usually the ref-induced replays that are the ones that take a super long time. Don't get me wrong, all of that will contribute to disrupting the flow of the game. But I think the league is aware of the fact that that's an issue and people are definitely not fans of that. And I think everyone wants to get the game to be more of a flow. So I think they'll counterbalance that with something, hopefully. But I definitely I like the rule. I don't think you should be penalized for being correct in it.
Exactly.
Like you should be rewarded for that to some degree. And it's honestly, I think it's better when teams have challenges inside the closing 2 minutes of a game. Because even though slowing a game is somewhat annoying, very annoying in the first half and then the long stretches of it, when you get to down to like last 2 minutes of an NBA Finals game, you kind of want each moment to be kind of slowed down frame by frame. Like think back to like 2016, like NBA Finals Game 7, stuff like that, where like you want to see each and every moment. But at the same time, you don't want the momentum and the drama to be disrupted. So it's a weird line to toe, I guess. But I'm definitely a fan of that one. As for the second rule that they implemented, it's an in-game penalty for flops resulting in technical foul free throws, which is an interesting one because it benefits the offensive player, which the offensive player already has so many advantages, and takes the ability of the defensive player to really slow down transition and derive benefit from a league that's already dominated by such freakish scores and hard players to stop. But Kyle, what are your thoughts on that one specifically?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. If you think about players like Damian Lillard, James Harden, Steph Curry, Kyrie Irving, those extremely quick, smart, fast shooters, it's so hard running through a million off-ball screens, on-ball screens, trying to stay in their hip, knowing that they could just quickly rise up for a jump shot at any moment. That's already so difficult to guard them at a high level. And like you said, if you really think about this rule in depth at all, it does seem to be penalizing the defense. I'm definitely not a fan of this rule, just first reaction to it. The reason why I don't think it's going to be all too consequential at the end of the day is I think this is such a subjective call that referees and officials are going to be very kind of strict about when they pull it out. I kind of talked about this before we started recording, but I think this is going to be reserved for very flagrant situations, Shaqtin' a Fool type of flops, like Marcus Smart from a few years ago. I know that's a super like famous, funny one, but just stuff like that. I think that's kind of what this rule is going to be safe for, just so the officials do have something in paper to kind of fall back on for when super obvious things like that happen. I think that if this was to kind of happen in like a game deciding moment, I think there'd be a lot of backlash on that. So we'll see with this one. I think this is one we're going to have to wait and see on. Initial reaction, I don't love it, but I don't think it's going to be all too consequential in the long term.
On the flip side, though, from the offensive player's perspective, it may actually help the defender more so than it maybe I initially realized or initially thought about when I first read this, in the sense that, I mean, a lot of players thrive off of drawing contact from like not aggressive flops, but slight flops. So I'm curious to see how closely they monitor it, because someone like a player like James Harden, historically, half his points he gets from the free throw line are not truly fouls. It's just him getting in the right position and then being a really good actor. And
hooking or snapping the neck back, things like that. Yeah.
And so hopefully maybe that's what gets minimized, and maybe that's even their intention, is to focus more on that side of the deal. But obviously anything you change in one direction also pulls away from the other direction. So we'll see how that all shapes up. But I think it's definitely going to be an interesting change. And I like the fact that the NBA makes changes like this in experiments to ultimately make the game better. So I like the direction they're going in.
Yeah, 100%. So now we're going to be giving a quick update on the Portland Trail Blazers. Not much has been made in terms of news this week for the Blazers. Scoot Henderson's not playing in the summer league. No movement has been made on a Damian Lillard trade yet. But Damian Lillard did like a tweet this week that kind of went viral. A lot of people were talking about it locally. To paraphrase, the tweet essentially said, Portland Trail Blazers, please sell the team to Phil Knight. He will be willing to spend more than Jody. He'll be willing to go into the luxury tax more. He'll convince Damian Lillard to stay. And Dame, as classic cryptic on Twitter, like he always is, likes the tweet. So for me, my thoughts on this are, this is kind of just more of what we already knew. We knew that Jody was a cheap owner who sees running the Portland Trail Blazers as a business as opposed to a passion. And that's really disappointing. But for me, it's kind of just more of what we already knew. Trent, what do you think about this?
Yeah, it's just obviously disappointing to read. You never want to read something like that. And it's kind of interesting how Dame, he always just like splashes in a little teaser like that every now and then. And now to be on the receiving end of some of the negative stuff is definitely not the best. But I guess we'll just continue to sit in no man's land waiting for the trade to happen. In the meantime, I'm going to be focused on NFL and other teams. So, because all we can do is wait at this point. So,
yeah. Yep, that's where we're at right now.
So the first team we're going to break down is the Memphis Grizzlies. Last season, they finished 51-31, number 2 seed in the West, and of course lost to the Los Angeles Lakers in 6 games. Just a really interesting team over the last 2 years. They really went from number 2 pick with Ja Morant to just onto the scene really quickly. It's kind of one of the quickest turnarounds for a team in a rebuilding sequence that I've really ever seen. It's almost kind of similar to what the Thunder did last year a little bit, in the way they flipped the script super quickly, but even more dramatic. So we're going to break down the acquisitions that they've made and changes they've made this offseason, and then talk more holistically about the Memphis Grizzlies squad. So they drafted Gigi Jackson at number 45 out of South Carolina, who's a really interesting prospect, power forward / small forward archetype. He's the youngest player in the draft. I believe he either just turned 19 or is still 18. I can't remember which one. I think he's 19 now.
Yeah.
And he's not a high percentage shooter by any means or an efficient scorer, but he has the ability to score at all 3 levels. Really impressive defender, good athlete. Played pretty well in Summer League when he got the opportunity. I don't think this year he'll be necessarily a rotational guy. But I think maybe next year or the year after that, kind of the same trajectory as like a Kenny Lofton or David Roddy. But I think he has a higher ceiling than those guys. But an interesting player, 2nd round pick. So as far as additions, they added Marcus Smart, obviously in that flipping Tyus Jones and that whole trade situation. Re-signed Desmond Bane to a max contract, which I like because he stays on the floor. It's a good high clip shooter, and he's a good defender, and he's young. He's a good culture guy, and I like that he's an agitator and he talks shit. I like that about him. Got Josh Christopher as well, who's a young player, kind of fits, I think, the Memphis Grizzlies culture role. I feel like the way he plays is kind of a bulldog type player. And then they also added Derrick Rose, who I hope will be able to mentor Ja Morant a little bit and be just a positive piece in that locker room. I'd actually be curious to see kind of some behind the scenes stuff on like his role in impacting quickly this past 2 seasons, and then maybe even Jalen Brunson this past season, because I can't foresee him not having some type of positive role. He's just a laid back guy behind the scenes. And honestly, I was kind of surprised, and I don't know about his health. I don't know why he didn't get any rotational minutes in the closing portion of that season. I think he may have been injured, right? Battling a little bit of an injury. But there was long spurts where he just didn't even go in and he was healthy. And he still can contribute, I think. I mean, in the games he plays, he can still score, and maybe his defense dropped off a little bit. Maybe he can contribute a little bit, especially while Jaw's out this first 25 games with his suspension. And then players that they lost, Dylan Brooks, who had a very poor ending to his career in Memphis with the Lakers, calling out LeBron, saying he doesn't respect you until you give him 40, and then he got 40, and then trying to speak to the media. I think unanimously, even amongst agitator people, type players, and players who respect Dylan Brooks, I think that he lost a lot of brownie points with a lot of people. And then, of course, Tyus Jones, who is, don't check me on this exact statistic, but he is one of the, if not the highest assist-to-turnover ratios in NBA history for a career. Phenomenal passer. His decision-making is just picture perfect. It's beautiful. Like, he plays basketball. You hear a lot of people say, plays basketball the right way, and they kind of use that term pretty loosely, but he fucking plays basketball the right way, and he makes the right reads almost every single time. He's a good defender, good three-point shooter. He does everything you need, and he's had a cool career arc, I think. Just starting out as a bench guy, rotational guy, backup starter. Now he's probably going to start in Washington, right, with Poole. That'll be that backcourt, and I think maybe even will have a positive influence on that team as they rebuild. And then one thing I forgot to kind of mention is maybe the increased roles of some players they already have on their roster. Luke Kennard, one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA, highest percentage three-point shooters in the NBA, who is actually, I just read this, I believe 7th all-time career three-point percentage. I will verify that in between segments, and we'll verify that one. But and then also Kenny Lofton, who's a really unique player, heavy body, can shoot, do a lot of weird stuff, really good insanely good footwork for someone of his size. It's almost like a big baby Davis / like, I don't even know. He's a really hard player to find a comparison for. And then David Roddy, who's also kind of that just like really big body mold type player with pretty good bounce and some good defensive prowess, and got some matchup minutes against LeBron in the playoffs this past season. And then Jake LaRavia, who they got in the first round last year, who's a really good three-point shooter, or to be seen, really good three-point shooter, but good in college. And we'll see their roles get elevated as Ja is out as well, and see how that rotation works. And as we know, they are incredibly good at succeeding when Ja Morant isn't in the game, and isn't playing and is out, or even Jaren Jackson, whoever it is that needs to fill that role. So, Kyle, do you want to talk about their ability to do that over the past 2 seasons?
Yeah, so that's obviously been something that's been brought up a lot. The Grizzlies' record without Ja, a lot of conversation about, are the Grizzlies even better without Ja? And I think that's definitely taking it too far. I think that's a clear overreaction. But it's very interesting how this team is kind of able to kind of get into a different gear when Ja Morant, their best player, isn't on the court. And I think a lot of that is because of Tyus Jones, to be honest. You hinted at this earlier, but Tyus Jones, in my opinion, is the perfect backup point guard. Because of the nature of the position in today's NBA, if you don't have a top 12 scoring elite point guard, it's very hard to win unless every other position is just so stacked. But he's the perfect backup point guard. I mean, he does everything right. The assisted turnovers, like you said, just a complete floor general in every sense of the word. I think he's going to play his ass off in Washington, and then I think he's probably going to get traded at the deadline to a contender who needs another guard in the rotation. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it, is just a guy like that. It's the perfect guy to step in when a star point guard goes down. So that being said, they added Marcus Smart, who is a really interesting fit with this team. I had a lot of kind of conflicting thoughts on this trade when it first happened. It was a very weird trade. But for the Grizzlies, I really like it at the end of the day. I think that the Grizzlies are going to be the best defense in the NBA this year. Just if you just think about Jaren Jackson, reigning defensive player, Marcus Smart, reigning defensive player 2 years ago, Desmond Bane, Steven Adams in there if JJJ isn't playing the 5. You have an assortment of wings off the bench who 3-and-D can defend, and then Ja can hold up at point guard. So I think this is going to be an absolute monster on defense. My main question with this team is just the way the roster is constructed right now, kind of centered around Ja as your star franchise player and Jaren Jackson as your kind of supporting co-star, two-way defensive big. Can this roster win with its construction of those two and then a rotation of supporting 3-and-D players like Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane? Great players. I love both those players. I think they're some of the best non-All-Stars in the league, to be honest. But is that enough to win in the competitive NBA right now? Is that enough to take down teams like the Nuggets, teams like the Lakers? In the past, it hasn't been. So I think that's going to be a big storyline this season, as well as obviously Ja missing the first 25 games. That's going to be big to see if they can kind of stay afloat or if they get off to a little bit of a rocky start. We'll see. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think to answer your question you just said about their ability to compete as it's constructed right now, I think there's too much weight on Desmond Bane and Luke Kennard 3-point shooting wise. I just think there's too much weight. I just don't think it makes sense. There's too many interior players and lack of efficiency on the perimeter. But I do think, with that being said, like they're literally one player at the deadline away from being one who could compete in those scenarios and win playoff games and win playoff series. And I think the interesting thing about this team is the fact that they have 2 straight seasons of playoff experience to go off of. And even though they didn't end successfully, in getting a chance to play against LeBron and to play against the Warriors, they've seen it. And I think they've just gone through so much drama and with the jaw situation and all that stuff and having so many different injuries and people out, and the fact that they've still kind of persevered. I just realized this. It just popped into my head. There's some shades of the Heat in them, not culture-wise, but shades of the Heat as far as going through all these different trials and tribulations. And if you have the right leader in that locker room, which I think Marcus Smart will be, and I think their coach is really good. I think their coach is legit, and I think he's just kind of getting his footing as well and making a name for himself. I think it could turn into something special, especially with a lot of these guys being under contract for the next 4 or 5 years. They will be in a similar contractual situation to kind of the Nuggets a little bit. And then to verify the statistic I was just saying, Luke Kennard is actually 5th all-time 3-point percentage at 30 or 43%.
Yeah, wow.
So, which is pretty incredible. That's a weird list. We will have to have a segment talking about that. So it goes Steve Kerr, Hubert Davis, Drazen Petrovic in the top 3, all of which career took less than 3 threes a game, less than 3 attempts. I believe actually less than 2.6. And then it goes Joe Harris 4. Bet nobody knew that one. And then Luke Kennard and Steph Curry following those 3, all with, I think, over 4 attempts a game or 5 attempts. Yeah. So very weird and fascinating. Yeah. So that's it with the Grizzlies segment. Next, we're going to move on to the Cleveland Cavaliers. So the Cleveland Cavaliers, they finished 51-31 last year, number 4 in the East. Really good defensive team from the interior wise with their all-star front court with Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. But they ended up losing in 5 games to the New York Knicks. Very, very disappointing end of the season. I don't think, at least me going into that series, I didn't think that they were going to lose in 5. I thought that was really shocking. As far as offseason stuff, coming off of that, they drafted Emoni Bates at 49, which really looks like it's going to be a pretty good acquisition for a late-round pick, and him being 6'9" and having all those tools to score the basketball and having proven he can be one of the best players amongst his peers in high school, and then not as much so in college, but all the tangible tools are there. And he showed in summer league that he can score and he can shoot. He actually showed a lot of decent flashes too defensively. Really good hands and was in the right spot in the right time sometimes. It's just when he gets a stronger defender on him, he's fucked. But I think he can add a little bit of weight and then be competent enough to be a 6-man type guy. I don't foresee him being a long-term starter / all-star guy. Like I just don't really see that. I could be totally wrong because he is 6'9" and plays with like really high-level guard skills. But we will see with that. But in talking about the Cavs, they really need perimeter shooting and they need perimeter defense, and then that's really their biggest weak point. So the opportunity is going to be there for him, even though they added Max Strus and Georges Niang, Ty Jerome, Damian Jones, re-signed Karis LeVert, losing Chetty Osman. So there's some more dudes to kind of fill those wing roles and maybe backup guard positions and kind of the holes in their roster. I still think Amani Bates is going to have the opportunity there. I think Strus is definitely going to be the one taking the load at the 3, very likely. I don't see them starting with Isaac Okoro. I think most likely what they'll do is Strus will play the minutes when whatever the opposing team's star perimeter scorer isn't on the floor, Strus will be in, and they'll try to stagger that as much as they can. And then when that opposing player comes back on, Okoro will join the floor. I don't really see them being on the floor at the same time, almost really ever. I mean, but I don't know. I'm not NBA head coach. I just don't really see that necessarily working out. And then Georges Niang is actually an underrated shooter, really good corner 3-point shooter, and good stretch guy that could add some depth to Cleveland. But at the end of the day, Cleveland didn't make a ton of changes. They made just small little incremental shifts. What are your thoughts on that, Kyle, as kind of their season and then going forward?
Yeah, so the way this roster is kind of constructed right now, they're really just hoping that their wings, their guards, can just do enough on the perimeter to funnel everybody into Mobley and Allen, and those guys will handle it from there, and that'll be a good enough foundation to anchor one of the best defenses in the league. And obviously Mitchell, Garland, they have enough shot making on the other end for anybody, especially adding Strus. You actually get a 3 who can shoot. Obviously, Okoro struggled a ton from 3 last year. He obviously, in an ideal world, would be the perfect 3 for them because he's a great defender, but he couldn't shoot at all last year, so kind of got played off the floor. My question is kind of similar to Memphis, and just, does this roster construction actually make any sense? Because you think about it, and you think about the undersized guard duo. I mean, in Portland, we had this for the longest time with Damon CJ and then eventually Damon Ant. Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland kind of have shades of that. They're both very undersized for their positions. They're both shot makers, very offensive oriented. Donovan Mitchell's kind of an underrated defender, in my opinion. But Garland definitely gets picked on a lot. So you would think that a front court of guys like Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen makes perfect sense next to them. And it does, but in a 7-game series against other contenders, is this sustainable? Is this enough to kind of get you to the next step? Or do they kind of need to switch some things up a little bit? Do they need to maybe go for a more offensive-oriented center next to Mobley and have him anchor the defense? Maybe use Jarrett Allen to get a little more depth in other places, because they're really lacking depth. They have been since the Mitchell trade. They just need more guys who can come in, defend, and shoot. And they kind of made strides in getting those players, but I still think they're a little bit away. Last year, I completely whiffed on this team. I thought they were true contenders. I thought they were a big dark horse to come out of the East, and then they lost in 5 to a team that I didn't think was very good at all. So that makes you kind of question if this is going to work at all. And I think this is kind of a big make or break year, because if they fizzle out again, I definitely foresee some huge changes coming if they don't make any big changes before the season.
Yeah, and I think the key to all that is Evan Mobley by a lot. I think because he went 15 points per game, 16 points per game, didn't really have a huge jump. And I think if he goes to 22, then we're looking at maybe they're contending to be in the Eastern Conference Finals. Maybe that's the thing that pushes them over the edge. And then Strus shooting better than he did last year at 3 and filling that role to some degree of their lack of perimeter shooting, and then hopefully allowing a core to just focus on defense, and then maybe that'll improve their perimeter defense, and then maybe even Mobley being able to switch out and play some more perimeter stuff. But I think Mobley's scoring, I think, could make a massive change for this team and put them over the hump. Kind of in the same way I think Keegan Murray's scoring could change with the Kings and kind of put them over the edge. Not that the Kings need any more scoring, but we'll get into that as we talk about the Kings and a few teams. But I think that's the biggest thing with them. Next, with the Phoenix Suns, of course, kind of the hot topic of this year's free agency and off-season, NBA off-season. Obviously, the blaring thing, they added Bradley Beal and got rid of CP3, and then have retooled the rest of their roster as well. As far as how they finished, they They finished 45-37 as the number 4 seed in the West after kind of some struggling throughout the season, and then piecing things together after acquiring Kevin Durant and dishing out all their major assets. Ended up beating the Clippers in 5 games, which for me personally turned out to be a very interesting series despite all the injuries that happened to the Clippers and them not having Kawhi and PG. I still enjoyed watching Russ cook to some degree with all the disrespect that people were throwing in his direction. And we'll talk about that when we get to the Clippers as well. And then ended up losing to the Nuggets in 6, having the most success against them, but ultimately got a very sour taste in their mouth, getting blown out for the second straight season in a row in a closeout game by an absolutely ridiculous margin. Just embarrassing. And honestly, those are the types of games that you finish a season with that changes the entire trajectory of your decision making as a franchise. It's something that's that embarrassing, which I think ultimately led to where we're at now, in adding Bradley Beal and then all these other acquisitions, which I will quickly list now. So they added Bol in kind of a trade situation, flipping a bunch of second round picks, and then clearing up a little bit of space for him. And then, I can't remember if they came out with the exact number of the contract yet. I haven't seen the report yet, if it has. And then they added Eubanks from the Blazers, who, despite a lot of Blazers really hating him, I think does a good job filling his role when it's needed. And I think he plays really hard. And there's some positive spots in his game. And obviously he's a beast, so I'm just rooting for him. And then Eric Gordon, who could be a dark horse, great signing. One of the weirdest, at least for me as a fan, weirdest players in the league. As far as always, when he's on the floor, puts up pretty good scoring numbers, but just like is just never talked about. He's not like really particularly flashy, and he's just like always kind of in the cracks and in the background. He just has never really had that like really blaring like decisive moment in his career to like make his name a household name. I don't know. Just a weird player that's like pretty good, but I don't know, maybe doesn't get the respect he deserves. And then Jordan Goodwin, Chimezie Metu from I believe from the Kings, and then Yuta Watanabe from Brooklyn, and then they re-signed Josh Okogie. Ended up losing Cameron Payne, obviously CP3, Landry Shamet, and Torrey Craig. So I think we'll get the big thing out of the way with the Bradley Beal acquisition. Kyle, what were your initial thoughts on that, and how has that kind of developed into your current opinion on it?
Yeah, so when they made the Bradley Beal trade, I wasn't a fan at all. It just didn't make much sense to me from a basketball standpoint to kind of just add another shot creator who's questionable on defense at a position that was already kind of filled for them. The Suns' problems wasn't shot creation. You have Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. That's plenty of shot creation for an entire team. But considering all of the following moves, I'm more okay with it now, and that's because somehow they managed to kind of build out this roster with decent players. I like a lot of their acquisitions. Eric Gordon, like you talked about, really good free agent signing, really good player. Bol somehow just falls into their lap. No idea why the Magic cut him, but I think still has a lot of potential and a pretty versatile player at that. Yuta Watanabe, a player I actually love, one of my favorite, like underrated, kind of like under the radar signings. That's the perfect player to come off the bench for this team. So, you know, they're going for it. They're going for the Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker thing. Will it work? Who knows? I mean, it could. I'm still skeptical. I think it's a little repetitive. Who's going to be handling the ball handling duties? I assume it's Devin Booker. But we'll see. That'll be super interesting. But they fully committed to going down this path, and post Bradley Beal trade, I think they've made amazing moves, honestly. So I'm not hating on this team as much as I was following that Bradley Beal trade. I still think better constructed teams in the West will kind of outlast them in a deep playoff series. But this will be interesting. I think this is one of Kevin Durant's last true prime years. I think he's kind of quietly aging as we're watching this. So kind of now or never for him. Devin Booker, obviously one of the best players in the league, like a top 10 player in the league, in my opinion. Absolutely incredible in the playoffs last year. Bradley Beal in a third All-Star role is really interesting. A lot of people have been kind of comparing him to prime Ray Allen on the Celtics, kind of being more of a spot shooter who also is like the third option as a creator. interesting. And now DeAndre Ayton obviously just going to be a play finisher. They're never going to fully embrace the DeAndre Ayton thing. They probably shouldn't at this point. I mean, I think that train's kind of passed. But yeah, their bench is kind of solid now, and that makes me a lot more confident in them.
Yeah, their bench has just weirdly filled out in a way that I didn't think was necessarily possible. But I think they offer a unique position for players who are likely going to sign to a minimum. I mean, obviously, there's like the ring chase attribute that's there. And just, I don't know. I think it's a unique situation, especially with the Bradley Beal trade. So initially, my thoughts were heavily negative. I thought it was stupid. Not only did I was just mad from a fan standpoint. I just didn't want another super team. And I just was mad from like a selfish standpoint that I didn't want it to change the parity that we were so blessed with this past season. Maybe the most parity we've ever seen in our lifetimes in the NBA season. And so I was really pissed about that. And then I just I don't know. I didn't think that it was going to work from a basketball standpoint, which it very well might not still. Just because there's so many scorers and so many mouths to feed. And like I was saying, the bench didn't really seem like it was particularly going to be effective. Defensively, there's definitely some holes, but I think they can definitely. Frank Vogel, having been hired, can change a lot. And also their assistants, David Fizdale and John Lucas, I think are really good personalities to have in their locker room that I think could help build a competent defense, which I think a competent defense paired with health, you don't want to fucking see this team in the playoffs.
Yeah.
It does not need to be elaborated on or explained. Especially maybe my biggest takeaway from watching the Phoenix Suns in the playoffs this past season, outside of the fact that they needed depth and they needed role players and they needed their culture to be reinstated, which they didn't really address any of those three, is the fact that Devin Booker was, in my opinion, even if it didn't statistically pan out, visually a top 5 defender in the entire playoffs last season. You want to talk about what Bruce Brown did for the Nuggets? Devin Booker did the same thing. If you watch his defensive minutes, they were absurd. It was absurd. He was the best defensive player on the Suns for most of both series. If you watch him, and you could tell it was just a matter of fact of him making the decision, I want to be the best defender on the court. It was some Kobe shit. And I really enjoyed watching it. And I thought he took his game to another level. And I think he figured something out, despite the fact that they ended up losing, that I think he can take and carry with him. Don't necessarily look for that in the regular season, of course. But when the playoffs notch back around, he's now going to have a newfound sense of confidence that he has the abilities to guard the best player in the opposing team and be effective. Because his IQ is off the charts and needs to be talked about more. And the fact that he can play point guard and isn't a national point guard and do all this stuff, which, to answer what you're saying about the ball handler, I think they just said some reports that Beal is going to be the starting point guard. So it sounds like he's actually going to be more so of the ball handler from a starting lineup standpoint. But very likely they'll stagger the lineups and Booker will still handle the ball. And when you get into the playoffs, you want the ball in his hands. So that's very interesting. And then as far as the actual decision from a general manager standpoint, maybe the most interesting takeaway from this is, obviously as I just stated, I was not a fan of it. But if you consider the alternative, if you consider the opportunity cost that Matt Ishbia and James Jones had, expiring contract, not the best contract by any means in CP3, no cap space essentially. You can either keep that or just triple down, get rid of CP3, who's already on his way out, and just bite the bullet and get Bradley Beal in a position where you're probably the only team that can get him. And the weird trade clause, the way that the no trade clause situation that Bradley Beal was in, it ended up being this like super weird Goldilocks situation for Phoenix that no other team in the league had, where the trade-off isn't really even there, and you can just basically take fucking Bradley Beal for essentially not nothing. I'm not going to disrespect CP3 in that sense, but kind of nothing. And you just add Bradley Beal. Basketball part can come after that. All that can come after that fact. But when I look at it from that standpoint and then how well they filled out the roster, a lot more respect for the way Phoenix deals with transactions and their long-term strategy. Or I guess not long-term. It's a short-term strategy, very much so. But Phoenix has never won a championship. Why not buy in? I would love to have this type of decision-making in Portland.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's what a new owner will do for you, right?
That's what it comes down to. And he's a young dude, and he came in firing right off the bat. And then, you know what? I respect it.
Yeah, 100%.
And even though Monty Williams, I think, was a great coach, him going out and then getting replaced by Frank Vogel, you're bringing in a winner, a proven short-term winner with the Lakers, who flipped the team around with a lot of stars and a lot of drama in a whoever wants to say Luke Ness out there, Mickey Mouse season. He still did it in a really weird situation. And again, this is another really weird situation. It kind of makes sense.
Makes sense. I think that coaching swap kind of made sense for both teams. I mean, Monty just didn't fit where this team is at right now, and Vogel fits it a lot better. Even if you're kind of stacking them head to head, I think we're probably taking Monty as a better coach, if that makes sense. But that's not exactly what you look for in situations like that. So
yeah.
I think
Monty is kind of like a culture guy, and I think that's why I think he's going to work out on the Pistons.
Yeah.
You need with a rebuilding team, you need a culture coach. I think that's the most important part. And then when you have a team like this, short term, you need a defensive coach and a schematic coach. Not to say Monty Williams isn't that, but I think maybe a culture guy is his best trait. So, any more insight you have on that, or we're just going to have to wait and see the health of this team?
Yeah. I think we pretty much covered it. It's one of the most exciting teams to watch this year. I'm looking forward to seeing what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I'll be watching it live in Phoenix. I'm going to law school. Like 2 blocks away from their stadium, so I'll definitely have to catch some games.
Yeah.
And I was saying this crazy situation when I was trying to decide between University of Colorado and Arizona State. I was like, obviously thinking about like the games I got to watch, and it was when I was making that decision. It was during the Nuggets Suns series, and I was like jokingly saying, whoever wins is where I'm going to go to school, but I was like thinking of this crazy scenario, and this is before Dame requested a trade. This was when we were still at school, right? And the Heat were in the playoffs. I think it was when the Heat were playing the Knicks. I said, craziest scenario. Imagine this. I said, imagine the Suns go to the finals next year. Pre-Bradley Beal, everything. So just thinking Suns going to the finals next year with all their talent they already had. And then Dame goes to Miami, my second favorite team. And then I get to watch Damian Lillard win the finals in the finals when I'm in Phoenix if I end up going there. And it still could potentially happen.
It's
the Heat and things pan out the way they totally could. That would be insane. Obviously, ticket prices would be crazy, and I'd have to kind of finesse that. But
you'll figure something out.
Next, we're going to be talking about the Sacramento Kings. One of my favorite teams to watch this past season, and most pleasant surprises. I think one of, if not the biggest shifts in final win total predictions from what everybody thought they would be to what they actually were. They're 48-34, number 3 in the packed out West, and ended up losing to the Warriors in 7 games, which ultimately I think just came down to experience. But I think they next year will probably have the tools in that same situation to potentially even come out of that first round and make a deeper run. But they drafted a few good players that could potentially fit their system, some decent defenders, and Colby Jones out of Xavier at 34, and then Jalen Slauson out of Furman at 54, which I think some people probably would have saw in their first round upset. He was one of their better two-way players in March Madness. And then they added Chris Duarte out of Oregon, who's a good shooter in a kind of a trade situation. And then they also signed Sasha Bezenkov, who's a reigning EuroLeague MVP, pretty decent three-point shooter, 6'9", 225. Really just a wild card. I don't know if a ton of people know a great deal about him. He was drafted back in 2017 at the 57th pick. We'll just kind of see where he gets slated in, but he signed a 3-year, $20 million deal, which kind of is telling to me that he'll be a rotational guy, kind of like what me and Kyle were just talking about off air. But then they also re-signed Trey Lyles, Harrison Barnes, Domantas Sabonis, Alex Len, and then Keon Ellis. So retaining some of their core guys. And then ended up losing Metu, Matthew Dellavedova, and Rashawn Holmes. So not a ton of huge losses by any means. And then they added some depth. But, I mean, Kyle, you and I both know the biggest flaw in this team is they need some defense. They need to make that leap. Same problem Portland's been dealing with for many years is that side of the ball. And particularly the interior paint defense with Sabonis not being the best perimeter or not being the best interior guy, despite the fact of all the stuff that he does on the floor and being such a well-balanced player. Not a great shot blocker for his size, which is kind of surprising. Yeah, what do you kind of think about this team?
Yeah, I think the biggest question is, and you kind of alluded to it, it's what is the ideal player next to Sabonis? Because he's such an interesting and unique player. He's an amazing passer. He's an offensive hub, but he can't exactly space the floor. He's probably a natural four, you would say, because of that lack of interior defense, and can't really anchor a defense with rim protection or anything like that. But the lack of spacing and kind of having the offense run through him just makes him a really, really weird player at the four, because oftentimes fours are kind of 3-and-D players, kind of Jeremy Grant archetypes, kind of stand in the corner on offense, maybe a primary on-ball or second primary on-ball defender on the other side. Sabonis is quite the opposite of that. Yeah, he doesn't exactly have the skill set of a 5. So something that's been brought up this offseason is Pascal Siakam for this team. That's what I would want to see happen. That's like the most amazing landing spot for both players, I think. Seeing Pascal Siakam and Sabonis next to each other, it makes so much sense. They're both kind of unique and have kind of almost awkward games, but they would just complement each other perfectly. Siakam can't really play the traditional 5, but he can play the small ball 5, can space the floor a little bit, has a lot of shot creation on his own. I think that just makes so much sense next to Sabonis' passing and playmaking out of the high post with the 4, and then obviously the guards, the shooting that they have, Keegan Murray, Malik Monk. Obviously, De'Aaron Fox is going to be great, as he was last year. I think that would be so perfect, because this offseason they did need to get better on defense. Obviously, that was their biggest weakness. There wasn't really too much of an avenue to do that, though, through free agency. So I think just retaining this core for now is the right move. But until they can address that interior defense, I mean, look, the West runs through Denver, and I don't think it's out of the cards for this team to win a playoff series or maybe even 2. But for them to kind of get to that next level and potentially be a team that can make it out of the West, they're going to have to do something about that. And trading for Pascal Siakam would get them maybe their second best player. I don't know. Debatable. But it would get them their best defender, and to have their supporting pieces along with De'Aaron Fox, Sabonis, and Siakam, I think that would very much be a contender, and I'd love to see that.
How would they get him, though? Who'd they be giving up?
I mean, Siakam is only on a 1-year deal. I don't think you'd have to give up too much for him. Just picks and salary filler, I feel like.
Dealing with the Raptors, though? And
that is the thing. The only thing is Masai, for sure. Yeah, I mean, Masai's plan could be to just hold on to all his players and just run it back. Until something happens, I guess we were to assume that that's the plan with him. Same with OG Anunoby, who's in every trade rumor for the last 3 years. He's probably never going to get traded, probably going to stay on the team. But I don't know. I feel like there's some kind of scenario out there where they can choose to go young. Siakam, obviously, on a 1-year deal. If they saw Fred VanVleet leave for nothing, maybe don't want to do that again. Maybe want to kind of cash in on Siakam's value. So that would just be the perfect pairing. If not, you got to find some way to improve this defense. If it's not a player on Siakam's level, obviously there aren't many like him. If it's just someone off the bench who can come in, play 25 minutes a game, and just defend the rim, that'd be ideal for them.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting to see how they evolve a little bit. And I just think I'm really just looking for incremental improvement defensively, and then maintaining whatever they did offensively last year, or at least 90% of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this team will be in the right direction, because I think ultimately when potentially like a Siakam's contract does expire, I think they'll be able to sign guys like that. I think they'll have an attractive enough roster and culture, especially with Mike Brown. I love everything that they're doing. I think that they'll be able to attract a free agent, even though it is Sacramento. I think they will have pull more than they probably ever have, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm interested to see what they do. I'm definitely pulling for them. Any team that's never won a championship, I love to see them go out and try to do it. So, yeah, so that's it from the Sacramento Kings. So this next team is really interesting to me. I love talking about them. I love the way they've shaped up their roster and the strategy and direction they've gone in with Sam Presti, their general manager, and that is the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think it's really interesting to see the slight parallels between this team and the Kevin Durant, James Harden, Russell Westbrook dynasty. I think it definitely has shades of that. I don't think it's the same archetypes of players, but I think they are building almost a mini version of that, and hopefully they can capitalize unlike the way they did in the past. So, of course, they have their draft picks from this past season, but also with Chet Holmgren returning from his season-ending injury in the offseason last year, not getting to play his rookie year. So his rookie year will be postponed to this upcoming season. And his incredible ability to protect the rim and stretch the floor and do all the crazy unicorn type stuff that he does. If he can stay healthy, I think this team can be really good. They were finished 13th in defense last year, and I think just having him on the floor for 60 games, and hopefully a majority of those games are to close out the season at least, and have him in the playoffs, I think they could go to top 8. I would not be shocked at top 5 defensively, especially in adding Cason Wallace in the draft, flipping him for Derek Lively, and then they also ended up taking on Davis Bertans, the Latvian Lasers contract, but it doesn't really matter with them. They have so much cap space that it's not a big deal. And then they also drafted late Keontae Johnson, who has an interesting story, collapsed on the court back in, I think, 2020 with Florida, and then ended up making kind of a historic comeback with Kansas State and getting drafted. So obviously we're pulling for him. Not a ton of losses. They lost Dario Saric, but that's not too big of a deal. And then trading for Victor Oladipo and then also Ty Washington. So all these kind of weird players that they're plugging in and maybe kind of testing out to fill out their bench and maybe find a gem in the midst of all that and have what I think is a really good bet in Victor Oladipo coming from the best culture in the league and helping to kind of cultivate all these other guys in the roster. And then you talk about all the other dudes that are just phenomenal, such as both Jalen Williams is, and of course Jalen Williams, the guard, being more effective of the two in really showing, I think, future All-Star promise within, I think, 2 years. I'm not afraid to say that. I think his efficiency jump was just incredible. I love the way he plays. I think he fits really well into their team and probably any team, the way he plays. And then the other Jalen Williams, who shot really good from three-point line for some weird reason. Like, he didn't really, particularly at Arkansas, but he shot like a really high clip at OKC. Did good in filling in his kind of stretch big roles. He found a gem in Isaiah Joe, who was just lights out and just came out of nowhere and was really fun to watch. Had some crazy games, really interesting highlights. If you want to go check Isaiah Joe out, go check it out. He's only 165 pounds, and he's just wet balling on everybody. And I think it's fun to watch players like that. And then, of course, SGA and his rise to MVP contention and one of the best players in the NBA, not just best guards. First team all-league. He averaged a steal and a block throughout the season, made a massive defensive jump. And then also Josh Giddey, who I think a lot of people, fans, whether you're casual or not a casual, I think don't give him the chips that he deserves. I actually had the chance of watching the Thunder play the Blazers on February 10th. It was a tight game. It was one of kind of right before Dame got that last injury and ended up sitting out the rest of the season. And so I think Dame had 38. And it was one of the most entertaining games I've ever seen at the Moda Center. Each team's had 29 assists. There were 58 assists.
Dang.
It was so fun to watch. And if you know me, I love passing. I'll keep talking about it over and over again. It was the best passing NBA basketball game I've ever seen. And a lot of that came from Josh Giddey. And just his playmaking and his reads are just beautiful. And somehow he just comes away with buckets too. in the weirdest ways. Like he finds a way to 15 points almost every damn game, and it's all these scrap buckets, like offensive rebounds, put it back up, weird floater, a little fadeaway, a corner three here and there. Like he's putting together double-digit scoring averages and borderline 20 points per game averages without even having like a super flashy bag. And so just wait till he does, because he's really young. He's 6'8" and plays point guard. He's getting better. He's gonna have a better 3-point game. He's gonna have a little bit more of a size up game. Just he's that gets talked about the least out of all their big pieces. Their three big pieces, right, between SGA and Chet. I could see him having a big 3-point leap next year because he had a big one between year 1 and year 2. And just I have nothing but good things to say about this team, its direction, how fun it is to watch them. And I mean, just piggybacking off of that game I had so much fun watching them. So you can't tell it's one of my favorite teams. But Kyle, what do you think? I'll let you get in a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you kind of nailed most of it in terms of like player stuff. I agree with all of your takes on Giddey, especially. All of their players are kind of weird and unorthodox, but even Shea, like as good as Shea is, he's a top 10 player in the league, like you said. Even Shea has kind of a unique, unorthodox bag. It's interesting. I think the name of the game at this point for Thunder is just internal development and kind of starting to fit the puzzle together. I don't at this point think you need to make a crazy move with the picks. Just keep drafting at this point because you're not missing. I mean, all of these players just keep hitting, and people didn't like the Josh Giddey pick. People didn't like the Jalen Williams pick. Two of the best rookies in their respective classes, and their classes are both really good. Shea has obviously blossomed into what, and I think, could be the best player on a championship team. And then you have Chet Holmgren, who, in a class with Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson, could win Rookie of the Year this year. He 100% could. And I think the hype has kind of died down with him for a little bit. I just remember last summer league, how excited everyone was when he was doing Kevin Durant type of fadeaways. Obviously, a whole year of not seeing him play will do that. But let's not forget that this guy is generational as well. He's the Victor archetype. Obviously, we have someone who has an even higher ceiling coming in this year, and that kind of overshadows it. But if Chet is 85% of what he's projected to be, this team, we're not talking about this team could be good in a few years. We're talking about this team is good. And I'm excited to see what they do this year. Obviously, the West is really stacked, and everybody's trying to win in the West. Like 12 out of 15 teams are trying to win in the West. So I don't know how far in terms of playoff success they'd be looking at this year. But I really don't think that matters. They're all so young. It's just keep working on internal development, keep getting these guys reps, keep getting these guys reps together, and you'll eventually build something special. I think all eyes are kind of on OKC at this point. Everybody knows they're building something there. Everybody's been kind of talking about them ever since they blew up the whole Paul George, Russell Westbrook thing, and they just accumulated all those draft picks. And we're starting to see kind of the first steps of that come to fruition. So, yeah, just really excited to see these young players. Yeah.
Yeah, also a player that I think just needs to get a little bit of love before we pull off OKC is Lou Dort. I mean, he's just got better every single year. Best nickname in the league, if not the, in the torture chamber. I think it's so good. And I mean, his 3-point shooting efficiency has gone up. He's an absolute bulldog, like I've been referring to. Like, he's so strong and just does so much for them. And I think he was a huge part of them being 13th in the league defensively and not even really having a center. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He doesn't have any interior or shot blocking in the paint, which is, again, why having Chet back, like, that's the exact need they have. Exact need they have, they basically fill in with a generational unicorn talent who's not just has the talent, but he has the respect earned already by a lot of dudes. If you go listen to some all-star level players on these podcasts and stuff, talking behind the scenes about him, when they do summer runs and stuff, he guards Kevin Durant, he guards Paul George, he guards the best player, and he talks shit and gets into it, and he's the real deal. Just it's health. And so if he's on the floor, this is very interesting. One last thing to say as well is I think the Kason Wallace pick is interesting because he's kind of like Lou Dort. He's kind of like a Lou Dort with already having a 3-point shot. So I wonder if that's maybe foreshadowing them moving him, because if someone goes, it's probably going to be him. As great of a culture guy he is, and as much as we kind of like him, and so it would make sense for Kason Wallace to come in and fill his role, and then get to be paid on a rookie scale contract, and then do essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
Maybe get some return back on Lou Dort, which I think would be a great move if they made one.
Yeah.
We will see, because they're always making these little like weird deals, like the Ty Washington and Victor Oladipo, even Trey Mann, to another player we're not talking about, and Ousmane Dieng, like he got taken away last year.
Yep.
He could be an interesting player. I still don't think he's going to be a huge rotational guy yet. I could be wrong. He played well in the summer league, and he's interesting. He's definitely a project type guy, but very fascinating team. Definitely pay attention to them. If you don't have a favorite NBA team yet, now's the time to hop in.
Yeah.
Good one to choose. Any young kids out there. So that, I think, segues really well into our next team, the San Antonio Spurs. I mean, of course, the forefront of all that is one of the greatest prospects in NBA history, Victor Wembanyama. Also drafting Sidi Kosoko. Having the second worst record in the league last year put them in position to do that, and they ended up lucking out, obviously, having David Robinson and Tim Duncan with a number 1 overall pick in separate seasons, and then falling on the gold mine of Victor. So it's just a crazy shape up, and then filling out their roster, not making a ton of changes. They already have Jeremy Sohan, Devin Vassell, Keontae Johnson, or not Keontae Johnson, sorry, Keldon Johnson, my bad. And then Zach Collins, Malachi Branham, Devontae Graham, and Doug McDermott. And then adding Reggie Bullock, and then re-signing Trey Jones. And then Greg Popovich as well, 5-year for $80 million deal, which will obviously be his last contract considering how old he is. I can't remember. Is he 80 years old yet, or is he still late 70s?
I'm not sure, but yeah, 5 years for Pop. He's committed to the timeline, so one last hurrah for Pop, I'm assuming, and we'll see what he can do with this.
74, so he'll be 79 by the time of that contract, and he'll get to retire into the sunset, and had basically shaped up Victor into he'll be 24 years old at that point, and ready to take that. He'll be probably an MVP contention at that point, and the Spurs will be hopefully in a dynasty-like position. That's foreshadowing a lot, but in having Pop get to shape all that out, very interesting. I think it's a great move and perfect situation, and I'm sure they'll have a good hire there too after the longest current tenure in the NBA. So that very interesting situation. So what do you kind of think about this team? Maybe players that stick out outside of Victor, and then we can close out with some Wemby talk.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think the expectations are kind of crazy this year, obviously, with a generational player like Victor. I don't really expect this team to make noise in the West this year, as good as Victor is. I know, like I kind of alluded to with the Thunder, so many teams are trying to win in the West right now. It's so crowded to even make the play-in. I could see them as a play-in team, but I think they're going to be in the lottery again this year, and I think that's probably the best thing for them long-term. The roster actually is pretty solid if you look at it up and down. There's a lot of players I like. Jeremy Sohan in particular, just a really good defender, a very versatile defender. Someone who I think pairs wonderfully next to Victor. I think both of those guys are going to make multiple defensive teams. Hopefully he's one of the guys who's there for this potential long run in the Victor era in San Antonio. Vassell, obviously a player I like. Keldon Johnson as well. Not sure if they're going to be along the ride for the full kind of tenure with Victor. They've been in a lot of trade rumors, but both really good players. I don't really have too much to add to them. What they're missing, obviously, is a guard, and there was a lot of rumors this offseason about them wanting to add a young shot-creating guard, an Anthony Simons type. Didn't really have a path to doing that they were comfortable with, which is fine. I think there's always good shot-creating guards in the draft, especially in the range that they're more than likely going to be in next year. So I don't think you have to rush it with this team. I think that's the big thing. Kind of like the Thunder on a kind of a different level a few years later in the timeline. don't rush it. Work on internal development. I don't expect too much from this team this year, but I'm going to be watching them closely to see the development of guys like obviously Wemby and then Sohan and their kind of supporting cast.
Yeah, I think the Wemby Sohan is just a beautiful pair, and I think that should be the core. And I think if you stick with one of either Vassell or Keldon Johnson, um, I don't know. It's kind of a hard decision, but maybe just Keldon Johnson. I think that'd be a good little trio, and then you just wait for that guard in the draft, and then that's a really good core. But I mean, who knows? Vassell's also got some really good defensive prowess and he's a good shooter. So you don't want to just give up those assets for nothing. But ultimately, you do want to be in a position where you can find these good guards in the next 2 or 3 drafts. And I mean, every year there's 3 really good guards.
Yeah.
Every single year there's 3 really good guards, winning level guards. And so they'll find one eventually, whether that is through the draft or not. But leading into Victor, we're not going to try to harp on all the things that you can find everywhere else on the internet, on any mainstream network, because he's the most talked about player probably in the NBA right now already. Like maybe Damian Lillard rivals that a little bit right now, but that's cooled off so much that I'd still probably say it's Victor for good reason. He's 7'5", he can shoot, he's nimble, he can stretch the floor defensively, he's got a high IQ, he interviews really well, he speaks incredible English for having not his first language. He's really good with the media. He says all the right stuff. I mean, I think he's got some room to improve passing the ball and playmaking, but even that already is pretty polished. Not to mention the fact that he is going to immediately be a top 5 rim protector in the league, in my opinion. Immediately. And so a lot of people are skeptical. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that they hear all these great things and this perfect prospect, and they get skeptical and want to shoot some type of negative thing in his direction just because when you hear this type of stuff, it seems too good to be true, right? So I hear a lot of stuff about like his injury capabilities and his ability to stay healthy and whether he's going to be able to play an 82-game season, and well, maybe he's just like Chet Holmgren, and you know what I mean? Like that is the negative dialogue that comes out of the Chet, or that comes out of the Victor Wembanyama dialogue and conversation. But while I don't think that is necessarily wrong, very much so could get injured. I think if you pay attention to what he does pregame, and if you pay attention to who his trainer is and the stuff that they specifically do, go on Instagram and kind of look at that stuff and Draft Express and see the type of preparation he puts in to his body, and the fact that he is verbally explained that he's aware that he's very susceptible to these injuries and that he has a crazy weird body type and that he has to approach training and preparation differently than anyone else, extremely encouraging. I think like the biggest weakness and the biggest fear for him and everyone else is that injury situation, and he's already addressing it full head of steam and facing it straight on. I think this is just incredible. I hope that's not the case, and I hope that all the preparation he's putting in is going to pay off, because I think the basketball world deserves him.
Yeah, 100%. Another thing is that the Spurs are already investing in very similar kind of training regimens with him. Obviously, kind of the stretching, as you kind of alluded to, everybody's seen that video of him, obviously like bear crawling barefoot and whatnot. But even off the court stuff, things like the 10 to 12 hours of sleep a night, it's just really fascinating, honestly, in terms of kind of maintaining a body like that. I mean, this isn't something that's normal. Human beings aren't meant to be 7'5", let alone be 7'5" and dribble through the legs doing step backs on a 82 game a year basis. So it's really interesting to watch from that standpoint. And that's a really interesting angle to take with a guy who every single thing has been said about already. So yeah, I'm really curious to see how this is all going to play out. I hope the best for him. I hope he lives up to all the hype and more, because that's kind of the best storyline for everybody involved, I think, and fans of the NBA.
Yeah, I think we're in good hands. I really do. I'm pretty confident. I've spent a lot of time evaluating it and looking at it not just this year, but over the past 3 years since I have known about him, maybe even 4, right? But yeah, I just can't wait to see it all in action. Don't expect it to be perfect right off the bat. Don't get too caught up in statistics and that type of stuff because he's going to figure it out and he's going to get better. He has the best mentors. He's saw the dinner where he went with Tim Duncan, David Robinson. He was Manu and Tony Parker, maybe someone else. I can't remember exactly. And they're already mentoring him, and he's got Pop in his corner. Considering he's what he displays and what he has portrayed so far, I'm very excited. So that's it on the Spurs. And Victor, we will have more on that going forward. But next, we're going to be talking about our predictions for the Most Improved Player Award in the NBA next season. I think it's an interesting conversation. I think it's, in my opinion, the most fascinating award. I don't really think I need to explain that. I just think it's a great award and very interesting look on it because there's always at least 4 or 5 dudes that really deserve it or are in the conversation. And I think it's just like a very typically, if you look at the dudes who win Most Improved Player awards, they end up having very good careers. It's rare you see a player get that award and then their career kind of fizzles off. But so Kyle, do you want to say your main? We're each going to give our main one and maybe slightly talk about some other ones, but we're going to have our local prediction. What is your prediction for Most Improved Player?
If I was to throw some money down on who I think is going to win Most Improved, my number one and kind of my Most Improved power rankings might be a homer take, but I'm taking Shaden Sharp. I mean, it just all the stars aligned perfectly for this award. He didn't have a big enough role last year to where kind of the mainstream has figured out that he's already really good. He only did it in a 12-game sample size, I think, which a lot with this award, you see guys kind of break out towards the end of the year, and then next year they're kind of in the conversation, but people kind of already knew about them. That kind of, I don't know, the semantics of the award and whatnot. The mainstream is still somewhat asleep on Shaden Sharp, I think. Obviously, the potential, everybody knows about that, but people are a little bit unaware of just what he did on both sides of the ball as the primary everything for the Blazers at the end of last season. And that's what he's going to be over the course of this entire season. I think he has potential to be the best player on the team. I think there are some other guys who could kind of fit that spot. But on defense, he has a huge wingspan. He was tasked with just going up against the best player on the other team for the last 12 games last year. Made a ton of mistakes, but that's good for him. I think if he kind of commits to that side of the ball, he can be a great defender. He can be kind of lockdown wing defender, I think, just because of his frame. The athleticism, everybody knows about that. His finishing, incredible. Shot creation, mid-range jumper, three-point jumper. He has all the tools to be a superstar, and he's way ahead of schedule, to be honest. I didn't even expect him to be a rotation player last year. Obviously, we ended up being bad, and that kind of allowed him to take a bigger role. But Shaden Sharp is just a textbook situation to win Most Improved Player. I think he would be my pick.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And just I think maybe being too close to him as a fan, that wasn't my initial thought. Just because it's almost like given in my head that he's going to take that leap.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it helps a lot too that he only averaged 9 points a game, and I just don't think that's reflective of like the back half of the season.
Yeah, I mean,
you were saying. I think that's going to come out to his advantage because a lot of it is this kind of a statistical jump.
Yeah,
I think they definitely take that a major evaluation into the statistical jump more so for the award than a lot of the other stuff. So, yeah, I'm excited to see what he does. Obviously,
yeah,
I can't wait. But it could be kind of weird with him and Scoot and Anthony. I think maybe that could be confusing as far as who's going to be the primary scorer and how that's going to operate. So I think that will determine a lot of his production. And I definitely foresee a little bit of – I don't think he's going to be as efficient as he was in that last 15-game stretch or whatever it was because he was shooting at like a really high clip and doing everything. It was absurd. I don't think he'll be doing that, but I think he'll be about – if I had to anticipate like a statistical season for him, I'd say about 17 a game. Let's see if this pans out. We'll look back on this in a year. I think about 17 points a game. I don't know about rebounds, but probably like 3 assists, 2.5 assists, and then probably will shoot about 32% from three, 33% from three, and about 44% from the field.
Yeah.
I think it'll be about that. And if he was better than that shooting percentage wise, he'll run away with the award. I think just that alone. And I think maybe kind of ceiling, I think he could be. I don't know. He's so crazy. I could see him being 22.
Yeah, honestly.
Right? I could see that's probably cap 22, 23. If he was over 23, everyone should be afraid.
Yeah.
Him at 20 years old at 23 points per game, that would be terrifying.
Yeah.
Probably not going to happen, but we will see. So for my pick, I'm going with a player from the exact same draft class. Maybe not in a situation that's as prosperous to win the award, but Keegan Murray, I think, is due for a little bit of a leap. Mainly, I think this because of his efficiency last season in a kind of a role player role with one of the highest scoring teams in the league, who didn't really have that shoot out at you number 2 scorer, right? I mean, Sabonis, I think, was their second highest scorer at 19 points per game. But I think there's room for him to be a 20-plus points per game guy. And I think that very well could happen next season. I think he could be 22 points per game, 23. And still shoot at the same percentage and just play more competently and definitely get some more points in the paint and kind of expand his game a little bit, maybe even play make a little bit. I'm not entirely sure of how it's going to look yet, but I am excited for the direction he's going in. And so I kind of anticipate that. But another player that I just thought I wanted to say in a side note that's the more obvious answer out of these two players that we just named is Mikal Bridges. I mean, essentially, he kind of was the most improved player last year when he flipped teams.
Yeah.
That would have been the case between seasons. That would have been he would have won the award probably. But I don't know how they're going to evaluate it as far as deciding it because he had that really good back half of the season and whether they're going to take that into account of the award. But he's going to be 24 plus points per game for sure.
Yeah.
A given. So, but as far as what I actually think should deserve it, I'm going to say Keegan Murray probably or Shaedon Sharpe. So,
yeah. Second year guys, both of them make sense.
Yeah.
One more guy I think who kind of has an outside shot would be Tyrese Maxey, and that's just because you lose James Harden. There's so many more on-ball reps for him, and I think Maxey's a great player. I think there's kind of a group of players all in the same age range, all who kind of play similar to me, and that's Tyrese Maxey, Jordan Poole, Anthony Simons, and Tyler Hero. I think they're all around 21 to 24 years old. They all are good shooters. Maxey's a little bit more of a slasher than both of them, or than all four of them, I guess. But I think Maxey's the best of that group. And in a world where the Sixers kind of lose Harden for nothing, I don't know what they'd kind of get back, but I think Maxey would be moved to much more on ball. I think Maxey could be really, really, really good next year. The only thing about him not winning this award is he already is good. I mean, how much more of a jump, especially statistically, can he take? It's not going to be as big of an uptick as a guy like Shaedon Sharpe, who averaged 9 points, like you said. Just pure numbers leaping off of the page at you. That's going to be kind of an uphill battle for Maxey. But I think Maxey could definitely be an all-star if Harden's traded and he's the primary ball handler. So I guess that'd kind of be my guy who has more of an outside shot of winning the award.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's interesting too. I think he's super fun to watch. It'll just obviously be dependent on James Harden.
Yeah.
We'll see where that takes us. All right, next, so transitioning into the NFL, we're going to each present our dark horse NFL teams and kind of teams who are flying under the radar that we don't think a ton of people globally are talking about and in the media that maybe need a little bit of love. So my team that I want to bring some light onto is the Indianapolis Colts. I think ultimately last season, it was one of the biggest disappointments I've ever seen from a team with that much talent. to have that big of a drop off. And I think part of that is because of their situation with Matt Ryan to some degree, and injuries and coaching, and it's just a dumpster fire at the end of the day. But with the amount of talent they already have, and having one of the best offensive lines in the league with Quentin Nelson at the forefront of that, I just think that's the foundation of any great football team. And I think the fact that their division, the AFC South, is just not particularly talented.
Yeah.
I think it's really the Jaguars, and then it's everybody else. And so I think there's definitely some opportunity there for them to get kind of an easy 3 wins between the Titans and the Texans. Could potentially even go 4-0. We'll see how that shapes up. But I think the fact that they added Anthony Richardson, and then some other like good filler players such as Josh Downs, who I think could be a really, really talented receiver, could potentially even be the number 1 receiver on this team in the next 2 to 3 years. Could even be it this year. Who knows? Like, he's that talented of a player. And then still a ton of talent on their defense with Kwity Paye, DeForest Buckner, Shaq Leonard, Kenny Moore, drafting some better players, Julius Brents, and then flipping their entire coaching staff, which I think is like honestly the biggest problem last year. Is it just wasn't, the leadership didn't really seem to be there, and it just didn't shape up the way it should have. So they hired head coach Shane Steichen, who's the Eagles offensive coordinator. And I think the fact that he had all that experience with Jalen Hurts, also a player that didn't have a super polished passing game coming out of college and was really powerful, strong runner, right? I think the fact that he helped bring him into a position of success is going to be very beneficial for Anthony Richardson and his development. And also, which is kind of an interesting caveat, is he was the offensive coordinator of the Chargers, Justin Herbert's rookie year. As far as like, if you want to create a parallel between the arm talent of Anthony Richardson and Herbert as far as strength, not necessarily accuracy, the fact that he helped bring out success in him in that season, another positive for them. So some experience that is definitely applicable to Anthony Richardson's development. Now, I don't expect him to – he'll definitely be bottom of the league as far as making reads and accuracy. But if he can just make incremental improvements and just be a really good rusher, almost the way Jalen Hurts was his rookie year, if he could pull off a season like that, I think this team could easily beat 10 wins, have 10 wins, considering their schedule. Their schedule is not particularly bad at all. They're matched up with 2 divisions. They're matched up with the AFC North, which is very tough, obviously, but also the NFC South. And then they're also kind of just weird wild card out of conference games is the Pats, out of division games is the Pats, the Rams, and the Raiders, which I think they could potentially win all 3 of those. So I just think they're in a position to where they could succeed if they figure things out. And then obviously still have Jonathan Taylor, who's the best player in fantasy 2 years ago and had a huge drop off last year with some foot injuries and stuff like that. I think he's just ready to kind of have that breakout season, kind of his last like really big season, one of his last, before he kind of goes into that typical running back somewhat drop off by like year 5. So yeah, what do you think about the Colts, Kyle? Do you think they have a shot at making the playoffs? What is kind of your perspective on
Yeah, it's probably going to depend on Richardson, to be honest. I mean, Anthony Richardson is a really interesting prospect, one of the most athletic QB prospects ever. A little bit of accuracy concerns, and I'm interested to see what the Colts are going to do this year, especially in terms of like red zone offense. I think Richardson could be a crazy red zone weapon. And obviously Jonathan Taylor, one of the best red zone weapons. So in terms of that, I think they're going to clean up a lot of really just dumpster fire level mistakes that they made last year. Obviously the talent is there kind of at all positions on the team. And the division is weak as well. My team honestly is, I'm going to say like super similar things to what you said. Yeah, go for it first.
Can I say one more thing about the Colts before we transition into this? Do you think that, because I was just thinking about this like on my drive back to my house, do you think that this could be the best, most dangerous quarterback, running back duo ever? Regardless of how good Anthony Richardson is as a passer.
Yeah.
Like kind of what Justin Fields was last year, and you pair that with Jonathan Taylor, what he was 2 years ago. Like, when has there ever been a QB running back tandem that dangerous?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. Everybody I'm kind of thinking of has I don't know. I think you're probably right with that.
Yeah, so that's something that people should pay attention to regardless of the passing. And then also the fact that if you watch Anthony Richardson interviews and what people talk about him, his character is super high. He loves to learn. He's really coachable, and has the franchise quarterback personality for sure.
Yeah,
For
definitely,
sure, for sure,
definitely.
for sure. So that'll be interesting. Sorry, now you can do your
Yeah.
transition.
I mean, yeah, it's a lot of really similar stuff for my team. And my team's the Atlanta Falcons. I think they're probably kind of favorited to come out of their division, but everybody's really sleeping on that division. And to be honest, there probably is the worst division in football. But I think Atlanta can have a little bit of like a New York Giants type of season, and I think they could come out and win a playoff game or maybe even two. This offense is really good, honestly. Desmond Ritter is the biggest question mark, and I'm not going to come on here and say that Desmond Ritter is going to be a great quarterback. I'm not ready to kind of give that take. I'm pretty, maybe not low, but I wouldn't say I'm exactly high on him. But he could be better than people think. He hasn't got at all a fair chance yet. And with this offense, with a run game that they had last year, which was already incredible, and adding a generational running back prospect to that with a great O-line, that's an incredible kind of option to lean on, as well as a generational tight end prospect in Kyle Pitts, who I think a lot of people think he's due for a bounce back season, myself included. He had one of the best seasons of a rookie tight end ever, and I think with better QB play and more consistent QB play, he can bounce back and be one of the league's best tight ends again. And Drake London also. People are kind of forgetting that Drake London is a first round great receiver. And if you look at guys drafted in his range in the past however many classes, these guys are really talented, even guys in his own class. And Drake London showed a lot of flashes of that last year. Drake London's one of my favorite receivers from a fantasy standpoint and a real life standpoint, honestly. I think he's gonna be great, just like all of these other kind of receivers that are 1, 2, 3 years into their careers. So I think this offense goes as far as Desmond Ritter takes them, and he doesn't have to be particularly great to take them far, in my opinion. The defense definitely has holes. It's not great by any means. The front seven, specifically the linebacker core, is lacking. But they have Calais Campbell still. Hopefully being able to get somewhat of a pass rush going because their secondary is the strength of their defense. Obviously, A.J. Terrell. But they added Jesse Bates as well, who I think we're both a big fan of. Jeff Okuda as well, another offseason addition to their secondary. So I think that's solid. And if their defense can play well enough, I think this offense is now good enough to win shootouts. If you look at last year, they had 7 wins, so not great, but kind of looking at a few games bounced their way, a few more yards, a few more touchdowns on the offensive side, and they could win some of those close games because quite a few of them were 3-point games, 4-point games, 5-point games, 6-point games. So similar to what you said, incredibly easy division, incredibly easy schedule. They play obviously 6 games against the Saints, the Bucs, and the Panthers. I think that can honestly be 6 wins. Realistically, I think 4 or 5 would be something you project. And then they play the NFC North, which is a middle of the pack division, in my opinion. They could split it, maybe. I don't know. But Lions, Packers, they could get one of those. And then Bears, Vikings probably get one of those as well. And then they play the AFC South. So similar thing to what you said. I think these are probably the 2 bottom divisions in the NFL. So they get to kind of beat up on each other. And they got games against the Cardinals, which they'll win. They got games against the Jets. Could be a loss. Probably will be a loss, but we'll see. Yeah, I think realistically, same thing like you said. I could easily see 10 wins for this team, and I even think they could beat maybe not the Seahawks or Niners. Maybe though, who knows? Injuries happen. They get to the playoffs. A team is kind of on the downward slope, or they're on the upward slope. Kind of similar thing that happened with the Giants and the Vikings this year. I think they just fall into that role perfectly, and I think you shouldn't really sleep on the Falcons this year. I think they have a good team.
Yeah, I think it's going to be between them and the Saints. I actually, as much as I am not the biggest fan of Saints direction and just kind of that franchise as a whole, I think the Derek Carr thing might kind of work in a weird way, and I think that they have a decent enough core, and I just think if you match up Falcons Saints, I think the coaching staff of the Saints wins every time. I just think the play calling for the Falcons is so like I don't mean this in a disrespectful way. I just mean it how it is. It's so like low level and I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it correctly. It's just like super one dimensional and old school.
It is old school. It's super old school.
I hate it. And I just don't. I think that's why Pitts is failing. I think it's just why nothing is really falling together the way it should. You can't play football like that anymore. I just don't think you can. You have to have creativity.
You can't play football like that when your running back is Tyler Algier, but what about when it's Bijan Robinson?
I just still don't like it. Because you can do the same thing. You can do all of that within the flow of a drive and then still mix in creative stuff.
I mean, I completely agree with that. Yeah, for sure.
Like there's plenty of teams that do that but they're also doing creative stuff. Like even like a team who I don't like their play calling particularly a ton, but like the Chargers do that.
Yeah.
Like at certain spurts they look like, and they're not my favorite play calling.
Yeah.
They're definitely better than Falcons in that standpoint. And when they get into the red zone, like they're very like smash mouth, like old school looking team. But they also have some creative stuff that they throw in with like their receivers and stuff. And honestly, having Herbert, that makes everything way different. But I just think there's some splashes of creativity that could be inserted into that team. And I think maybe when their coaching staff changes is when we'll see the shift. If that doesn't happen this season, I think that's when we will see it. So interesting stuff between those two teams. It'll be interesting to see how our predictions kind of pan out. So definitely some interesting stuff. Thank you guys so much for listening. Go ahead and subscribe and like the post. Maybe comment some potential topics that you'd like to hear us talk about. Really enjoyed this process. As we've said in the previous 2 episodes, we're going to continue to get better, and we'll kind of flip and transition more into NFL content and ease off of the NBA content as we go. Really excited for the next few episodes. So
thank you guys so much for watching. Looking forward to coming with another episode next week.